All right. Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the OCD and Anxiety Show. My name is Matt Cotty, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of Restored Minds and the creator of the AAA Response. And in this episode, we are going to talk about the idea that you are not your thoughts. So, before we dive into the show, a few things. So, down in the notes, there's some resources to help you out if you're struggling with OCD and anxiety. Starting with my book, From Stuck to Unstuck, as well as a 2-day workshop that we put together called Breaking Free from OCD and Anxiety. So please check those out. As well as we would really appreciate your support for the show by liking and subscribing and leaving a comment and review on either iTunes or Spotify or both, as it just helps the algorithm of the show. So let's go ahead and dive into today's episode with the idea that you are not your thoughts. Because this, I remember, probably was one of the most like, I don't know the word, whether it's like hopeful or, just exciting pieces of information that I learned on my journey. Because, when you're really in OCD and anxiety and your thoughts are flying, 100 miles a minute, and they're intrusive and they're, all these, images or disturbing things are flying through your mind. If you identify that you are your thoughts, right, and that's how you perceive yourself, well, then, like your personal view of yourself becomes very distorted, very disturbing, right? Because, the thoughts are happening automatically, and, it becomes this very like scary experience. And then so when I finally, came to this understanding of like, hey, you are not your thoughts, right? It's like, okay, well then who am I? Right? Like that's the next question that obviously pops up. And this is, the first thing, well, I shouldn't say the first, but, definitely one of the earliest things that we cover in our Taking Back Control program, right? Which is our 12-week program for OCD and anxiety recovery. And you can learn more about that at restoredminds.com. But one of the first things that we ever cover is this idea of consciousness, right? Because consciousness is everything on this journey. Albert Einstein famously said, right, you cannot solve a problem from the same level of consciousness in which it was created. And when the mind becomes very chaotic and very, disturbed, you can't go into the mind to try to talk that out and resolve it and all that. You have to elevate your consciousness to a higher level in order to resolve it. So this is really the idea of you are not your thoughts, right? Your consciousness, right? You're the one who notices your thoughts, who hears your thoughts, right? And so if I asked you, if you're listening to this and your mind's very, moving very fast or very slow, or certain thoughts are popping up, the question to ask yourself, and this is, more directly from Michael Singer's work, is how do you know that? How do you know your mind's going fast, right? How do you know that your mind's going slow? How do you know that these particular thoughts, how do you know your mind's saying what it's saying? Well, you're the one who hears it, right? And this is the key, is that, at certain times of your life, your mind has probably been slow. Or in certain times, your mind has probably not been as chaotic as it may be going right now, or vice versa. It may have been more chaotic in the past. And the question would be, well, how do you know that? Because the only reason that when the mind's going fast that it's so disturbing is because we judge it as a bad thing. Because if it was all that we were experiencing, we just wouldn't know any different. We would have no awareness of anything else, but we can remember consciously, right, times when the mind was calm and times when the mind is fast, times when the mind is saying, things we like, and times when the mind's saying things we don't like, right? But we, again, are that consistent awareness behind the mind. And so this is really the idea of consciousness. And so this is all I talk about in chapter 6 of the book, right? Because when I teach the AAA response, which is really the tool that we use to make sure that people aren't engaging in any of the mental and physical behaviors, right, to break that wheel. What's so important about the AAA response, and again, I emphasize this so much, not only in the program, but in the book as well, is you have to apply these tools from a higher level of consciousness. You cannot go and use tools like ERP or ACT or mindfulness or AAA response, right? You can't use these tools as like a whack-a-mole approach, Like, oh, there's a bad thought. I don't like it. I'm going to, I'm going to get rid of it, get rid of it, get rid of it, get rid of it. And I think this is the big problem that people do with the skill sets that they learn, is that they go with this whack-a-mole approach. And what the problem with that is that you're still living from the state of ego consciousness, and you're trying to, meaning that you believe you are the ego or the mind, right? And that whatever the mind says is, what you need to do and what needs to happen, and all this other stuff, when really that mind is just really developed out of fear. And this idea of awareness, and you being aware of the mind, is that idea of the subject object awareness that Michael Singer talks about in his book, The Untethered Soul, as well as his book Living Untethered. It's also what Eckhart Tolle talks about, right? When they talk about this idea of consciousness, and Power of Now, and a lot of his other work. And it's this idea of a separation from mind. This is what it means when we say, like, you are not your thoughts, especially when you're talking about these automatic thoughts that are just flying in your mind all the time. So, and again, you're the awareness of the thoughts. And this is, even something like Mark Freeman talks about, who also has a great YouTube channel and great resource for mental health, and just again building good mental health in your life. And he wrote a book called "You Are Not a Rock," but he talks about how, like, the brain is, when the brain is like telling you to check your phone, it's like, you don't need to check your phone just because your mind is saying check your phone, right? Your brain's ultimately becomes like addicted to these things of, like, just because your brain is saying something or your mind is saying something doesn't mean you need to follow it, right? And doesn't mean you need to pay it any attention, doesn't mean you need to give it any credibility or any of that. Like, you're the awareness, and you have the choice of what you do with these thoughts that pop up, right? Whether they're, and remembering that is so critical, because then it means that you have the ability, you still have control over your life. See, most people, when they think they are the mind and they're lost in this idea of trying to sort through the chaos of a very fast and racing mind, like, the thing that becomes overwhelming is they're trying to figure out which thoughts to follow and what's what, and sort through this chaos. And that's not a good approach, right? Really, your mind is something that you need to be using, right? You, the awareness, needs to be using as a tool, not you following whatever it's saying. I've once heard, like, the mind is a wonderful tool and a terrible friend, right? Or something to that effect. And it's so true, because it's trying to help you oftentimes, like trying to keep you alive and sending you all these fear messages and stuff like this, but it doesn't help you, right? And I mean, if you watch the mind long enough, you kind of come to that realization that 99.9% of the stuff it says is wrong. Never happens, right? And the more and more we engage with the mind, though, and the more and more we believe we are the mind, the more lost we become. And that's really what this work is about, in my opinion. When you talk about, like, what happens with OCD and anxiety is that oftentimes things get so chaotic inside that it almost forces you into a higher level of consciousness. It forces you to become that observing self, witness consciousness, awareness, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, right? It doesn't matter what we call it. It's more about that we're experiencing it correctly. And then when you are talking about putting tools into practice, like the AAA response, what is so critical is that we're putting those tools in from a higher level of consciousness. And I just cannot stress this point enough. And again, I think we talk about it in our group program, right? Like, every single call, right? Because it's like, inevitably, it's like this shift in consciousness is the most important part of recovery. Because if you're applying the skill sets from the same level of consciousness where the problem, like if you're trying to, as Mark Freeman said once, I think, if you're trying to outthink a thinking problem, that's a like that's a problem, right? Because essentially what happens is that you put the tools into practice and maybe you conquer a certain theme of fear, but then a new theme pops up, and then a new theme pops up, and then a new theme pops up. And you're going to be on an endless hamster wheel there if you're trying to, again, like fight with the mind using these skill sets. And that's not what the skills are for, or that's not what the tools are for, especially the AAA response. It really is designed to apply from a higher level of consciousness, and that is what makes it effective. And this is like, I think the number one mistake maybe that people make is that when they are really stuck in that loop and they're stuck in that thinking mind, and it's just racing all day and they're fighting with their mind, they go and read the skill sets or learn about the skill sets online, read a blog about ERP or watch a video or a podcast or whatnot. And they take that and try to apply it from that level of consciousness, and it doesn't work. And therefore they conclude that, oh, this doesn't work for me. And it's like, nothing could be further from the truth, right? Like this does work, and it works for anyone who applies it correctly. It's not magic, it's math, like I say, right? Like if you're engaging in safety behaviors or compulsions, that's gonna spin the wheel, right? Like it's just gonna happen. If we don't engage in safety behaviors, that wheel can't spin. So the thing becomes, we need to make sure that we're not engaging in compulsions or safety behaviors, mentally or physically. And that jump is everything on this journey, and that's why the work is making sure that this wheel is not spinning. And so, with all that being said, one of the first starting points and really one of the most important steps that we can make is, before you start even putting those skills into practice, is really starting to understand this idea of consciousness and developing that awareness, that higher level of consciousness. And then from that point, putting the tools into practice. And that will produce much better results in my experience. And again, this was stuff I didn't know when I was first starting out, right? This was like I learned things in the complete wrong order on my journey. I mean, I shouldn't say wrong. It's just, I learned things in a backwards order, right? So I'm saying this, and I wanted to talk about this topic specifically because I wish I would have known this right when like my life had gone into chaos when I was 18 years old, and I got stuck in this OCD loop for years, right? The reason that happened is, and then even when I was trying to help myself, it was so much chaos and confusion because I didn't understand how to do things. And a lot of it was because I was trying to play whack-a-mole with the thoughts in my mind and the feelings in my body, as opposed to really understanding this idea of consciousness first, then implementing the tools. And so with all that being said, there's a link down to the book. And again, in the notes, and like I said, Chapter 6 is where we talk about, I would encourage you to read everything, but Chapter 6 is really such an important point on consciousness, because I think that shift alone is a missing piece in many people's journeys. And then also, if you're interested in joining us in our community, we have an application you can complete at Restored Minds. We have our group program as well as one-on-one, where you can be part of our community if you're looking for help. And and I just really hope that this idea makes sense and that it's helpful, because I think this shift is foundational for someone's recovery. And I think in many ways, it's one of the greatest things that comes out of this process of struggling with OCD and anxiety, is really learning to live from a higher state of consciousness and not follow the mind all the time, because that usually leads to a lot of problems in life. And so with all that said, if you're interested in learning more about this, there's several resources, but again, a good starting place could be the book From Stuck to Unstuck that we just completed, or that I just completed. And, we have a link down below. Again, in consciousness, we talk about in Chapter 6. And if you're looking for more help, please reach out to us over at restoredminds.com. We'd be happy to to help you on this journey. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And we're going to continue this series on consciousness and really understanding, yourself as awareness, because I just think it's such a fundamental part of the recovery journey. So thank you. And I wish you guys a great week. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Hey there, hope you enjoyed that recent video. We really would appreciate your support real quick if you could like and subscribe to our channel. And if you're looking for help with